Hello kindred longevity lifestyle designers, this is Gum Your Secrets of Longevity.com. If you're familiar with my channel, you know that I don't cover specific diseases or major health issues as topics. And that's partly because, one, I want to focus on things that are building to health and sort of more long-term sustainable health, so more like lifestyle factors as opposed to the uniqueness of a certain health issue always requires a lot of components that isn't helpful to the general population. And also, I don't have training in dealing with these things, so I'd rather leave that up to the people that have more expertise in it, whether it's a naturopathic doctor that works with people with more serious chronic illnesses, or a Chinese doctor, or what have you. I've done this specific type of video before, and I'm just sort of doing an update on it to be more concise and be more in line with what I've currently understand about health and about these issues. Partly, just to be candid here, someone in my life recently died of cancer. Not super close, but a close family friend, and so it's been on my mind. And there's definitely times when I wish I could talk to them about these things, but it's always difficult to even remotely think about how one would go about bringing this up. It might be different if it was an actual family member. I know if it was a very close family member, I'd be much more candid and explicit with them about me wanting them to remain in this world, and I'd probably even go out of my way to pay for the things that I would recommend them do. Now, this is a very general approach to cancer as opposed to being specific to different types, because there's definitely even more specific things you do in certain cases. There's just a couple things I'll mention that are much better for, say, digestive cancers, is one I'm a little bit familiar with. But overall, there are some general guidelines that, in my opinion, everyone should do, and that might be all that's necessary depending on where you're at with its progression and how vigorous and firmly rooted it is in your body, how much it's spread, etc. Like my intro says, this is not medical advice. This is purely me saying what I would do for myself if I found myself in the position of having been diagnosed with some type of cancer. So, in the past I talked about vegetarian/vegan type approaches. I've been to the Hippocrates Health Institute, which is quite renowned for their approaches in dealing with cancer, as well as a wide variety of other illnesses, and that's sort of the foundation for a lot of the ideas I'll probably be presenting here. However, I'm not exclusive in terms of talking about this as it being a need to adhere to a vegan paradigm. What I understand as the big three factors that you need to kind of manage if you have this is that, and as far as I know, this is what stimulates cancer in terms of what cancer cells grow on, is salt intake. You ideally need to limit that. There's certainly many diseases that can benefit from higher salt intake. Cancer does not seem to be one of them. You want to cut back all salt except for what's naturally found in vegetables. Even going so far in washing salt off seaweeds if you're consuming them, which is actually really good because seaweeds have a lot of anti-cancer properties. But if you have dulse, for example, that often has that layer of salt on it that you want to wash off if you're going to be consuming it. Or you let it soak and rehydrate and then dump the water, maybe rinse it again. Small amounts of it here or there isn't going to be that drastic, but yes, eliminating all salt limits the access to salt by the cancer cells, and cancer cells basically have salt around their exterior. The second thing you want to limit is simple sugars. This is all fruit sugar, cane sugar, coconut sugar, honey, maple syrup, anything you can think of that is a simple sugar, not like a starch. You want to take it out of there. You might want to even consider going on a lower carbohydrate program, depending on what you thrive on from your genetic past. But certain types of beans, if they're prepared properly, if they agree with you, might be fine, especially if they're sprouted and or fermented first. But a lot of grains you might want to consider removing as well. It really depends on what your diet is leading up to this. If you're on a completely mainstream chemically laden diet, you might not have that insight as to whether you function well with beans or grains or these other starches, potatoes, etc. But if you're of an O blood type and or European in ancestry or other more northerly types of ancestry, you'd want to consider perhaps going completely low carb. So by doing that, you starve the cancer cells in your body of sugar, which they require a lot more of than the surrounding healthy cells. And that's actually one way that they can diagnose cancer, is they put a sugar solution intravenously into your blood system, and before actually putting it in, they've bonded the sugar to a radioactive compound. Very small amounts. It's not like they're dosing you up with a ton of radiation, although I'm sure there's health researchers out there that have probably recommended against this test. But yeah, they put that in. Then with whatever type of scan picks that radiation up, they can see where in the body is it concentrating. So if you say you have a lung tumor, and they just know there's health problems, they can't locate exactly where the tumor is, they give that intravenous radioactive sugar, and they see a faint glow throughout the body because that sugar has gone throughout the body and all the cells are eating it up. But there's a very highly concentrated pocket of it in your lung because that's where the tumor is, and it's just sucking up all that sugar because that's what it feeds on. So that last of the big three things has to do with protein. If any of you have ever read or followed T. Colin Campbell's work in other areas besides this book, the China study, you might come away from it thinking that animal foods are the cause of virtually every disease known to humans, and specifically the protein in animal foods, and that's not the case. His work has been debunked quite thoroughly by a range of both accredited and non-accredited authors. The accreditation is irrelevant when you consider even mainstream medical journals don't agree with his findings. They wouldn't publish his findings other than the major studies, so they would publish the information, but not the way he interpreted it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. But some of the things he talked about in the book were around increasing protein consumption as a macronutrient whole, as a percentage of the diet. As that goes up, higher cancer rates come about. And specifically, he also talked about how in the studies of rats, which by the way aren't humans, you can't make conclusive statements on studies on rats based on protein, but he was showing how when the amino acid composition in the rats' diets wasn't quite complete, they resulted in lower cancer rates because even though they were getting high protein, that one amino acid that might have been not in high enough amount was actually causing the whole protein intake to appear, at least to the rats' bodies, which were prone to cancer, having had the cancer beforehand, because cancer can flare up again more easily because it's basically seated in your body. So that lower amino acid out of the 12 major amino acids a rat would need or a human would need, having one of them slightly lower because you're consuming a plant food that is missing an amino acid in a large enough quantity, resulted in a lower rate of the cancer from returning. So this is the part I didn't get in the book, because T. Colin Campbell points out that by adding lysine or whatever amino acid was missing back into those diets in a higher quantity, that resulted in the return of the cancer cells. So he's making the claim that animal foods, because they have more complete amino acid profiles, that they cause cancer. Yet on vegan diets, these rats didn't have the problem until that amino acid was added back in. That tells me it's an issue with high protein in general, not animal versus vegan protein. If you get complete vegan protein with that amino acid in high enough amounts, and those who are careful with their diets and are vegan and vegetarian certainly do get enough of it, then it's going to be the same problem. So even Brian Clement at the Hippocrates Health Institute has talked about this quite a bit, but not that particular detail. He seems to leave it out in his talks. So it's an issue of protein, not animal protein. There's nothing unique in animal foods that's been connected with cancer that isn't in vegan or vegetarian diets. It's not the cholesterol causing the cancer. In fact, cholesterol has protective effects against cancer. So knowing this, I wouldn't, for myself or for someone I was convincing to do some sort of approach for cancer, I wouldn't say animal foods are a matter really at all. It's what you work best on. And by having some animal foods, especially higher fat animal foods, so you can bring down that overall protein level, you actually have more foods to work with in your approach while you're battling this disease. So interestingly, the Hippocrates Health Institute's diet, their raw food vegan diet, is a very high protein one. But I think the reason they have success is because all of the proteins coming from greens, and greens have massive amounts of chlorophyll, massive amounts of various other compounds that would counteract any growth of the cancer that might be caused by the higher protein in the diet. The sprouts, etc., are all very high in protein, complete protein as well. But yeah, they also have a ton of anti-carcinogenic properties. So what is the diet protocol I'd follow for myself? Well, it's quite similar to what I currently eat, which is liberal amounts of animal foods, making sure there's a substantial amount of greens with every meal. I go out of my way to consume almost exclusively sprouts. So I eat a lot of lettuce and things now. I just switch all that out with sprouts, which I would ideally do now. It's just a matter of time and money, because I wouldn't want to be growing them right now for myself. And chowing down on nothing but sprouts gets quite costly quite quickly. In the future, when it's more feasible for my income and or I'm dealing with a serious illness, I would drastically uptake my consumption of greens and also make a much more regular habit of juicing them as well. So the important thing with any animal foods is that you want to go for higher fat, lower protein. If you do a bit of monitoring of your overall protein intake as a percentage of your calories, you'd want to have it somewhere in the realm of at least below 20%, ideally 15%. That would be a really good range. You could bring it down even lower, and the only animal foods you might consume is more of the pure fats. Then you're talking about butter, marrow, and even then the only protein you might want to use instead of eating steaks is to use collagen from animals. That is very high in glycogen, which out of its amino acid profile is very low in methionine and these other sulfur-bearing amino acids, which means lower rates of cancer, because higher amounts of those are connected in some cases with the proliferation of these tumors and cancer cells and things like that. So that's the macro side of it. In terms of specific nutrients or specific foods or specific herbs I'd take if I was dealing with this illness, I would, number one, start on a regimen of phoenix tears. So what is that? Well, you can look it up and find out everything you need to know about preparing it and what quantity to take and how to take it and the effects it may or may not have. And this is basically an oil extraction of marijuana. You can actually do it and get the same effect or same anti-cancer effect from using hemp, which doesn't have the active THC, or at least anywhere near the same amount as you would with marijuana, but the THC has got some beneficial properties. So if you have issues with the legality or you're just not comfortable consuming it, then you can go for commercial hemp. If you can somehow get it, I don't know, like a mature plant, and you can prepare the same way, and you have tons of cannabinoids but just no THC. But if I was dealing with a serious form of cancer, the THC is going to have a wide range of beneficial effects, from deeper sleep, and that cathartic deep sleep is when a lot of healing occurs. It's got a lot of anti-nausea type benefits. If you happen to have done or are doing it at the same time, which is probably a little too conflicting because you're trying to build the body up while something else is tearing you down. We're talking about chemotherapy. Marijuana has often been used in conjunction with it, but just to try and counteract those after effects. But there's so much research now showing marijuana's effectiveness against cancers of almost every type I've seen. And again, I'll do this in more depth in another video. I've also talked about it not too long ago in one video, and I believe I put links below that, but this video is kind of off the cuff. I'm not putting references below it. So stick around if you want to see that in more depth in the future. But yeah, that alone might be more effective than all the diet stuff. There's people who just do phoenix tears on its own and kick cancer's butt just because it's such a powerful plant. The beneficial thing with phoenix tears, this extraction, is you're not heating it to the point of that compound becoming active, the THC. So even though you're consuming THC, the thing that gets people high, it's not heat activated, so it has a much, much, much milder effect. You're going to still have some of the properties that are typical of marijuana having some effect, but unlike baking it or smoking it, it's not going to be quite as profound and mind-altering. So Phoenix tears is the route if you don't want that effect. If you want the effect of the THC, if it's been heat activated, which is just as effective, you can prepare it cooked into some sort of brownie or something like that, or cookies or whatever. Low sugar cookies. Probably smoking it wouldn't be the best, just because even though it's still anti-carcinogenic once it's combusted, you are adding some carcinogenic material into your body. It's just more that your body has to deal with. Regular marijuana smokers really don't show any increased rates of cancers, so despite the fact that they're inhaling combusted plant material. So yeah, vaporizing it or anything else like that would be an effective way. So that's the big one in non-dietary approaches to what I would do if I was dealing with cancer. Another big one, and this is more specific to digestive cancers, but I'd still take it no matter what type of cancer I had, is chaga mushroom, but actually the combination of chaga and reishi. But specifically for digestive type cancers, so oral, throat, stomach, any type through the digestive tract, colon cancer, all of those respond very well to chaga mushroom, and cancers throughout the body do as well, and reishi is very good for cancers throughout the body. Another thing specifically for digestive cancers, not as much for the rest of the body, although it improves the immune function, so if you have it, it might still be beneficial, but some people are going to be questioning of it because of its content of IGF-1, which is believed and known to promote tumor growth. But that food is colostrum. So it's been shown in studies to reverse and treat and demolish digestive cancers. So definitely that would be huge on my list if I was dealing specifically with a digestive cancer of some type. But I might still even take it either way, no matter what I had, because of its potent immune enhancing properties. So I'm going to link to one video below, which is what I've done on IGF-1, and I called it the IGF-1 cancer myth. And yes, while IGF-1 promotes tumor growth, it actually does it under the right circumstances, and that's with a deficient amount of vitamin D in your system. So looking back to what we were talking about on protein, a factor in that complete range of amino acids promoting cancer was because a complete profile of amino acids boosts IGF-1 levels. When IGF-1 goes up, it stimulates cell growth and cell division, and cells that are mutating out of control respond to that even more so, and that causes the cancer to grow. But as the studies below the video that I'm linking to below show, this always happens in a low vitamin D environment. If you have adequate vitamin D, the IGF-1 doesn't appear to stimulate the cancer growth. So, next on my list is vitamin D. Get sunlight. Vitamin D, which is a hormone, less so than a vitamin, is probably the single nutrient or compound that is the most effective at preventing and even dealing with already present cancer. The scope of which people are deficient is quite astonishing. It doesn't take much research into this area to really understand this. You can't just take 1,000 or 2,000 international units a day and assume you're getting enough. It's about years and years of chronic deficiency that take high doses to reverse, but it's also about getting enough sun. If you live in a sunny climate, you're probably not deficient. If you perpetually get enough of it, if you have a darker skin tone, and you live in a more northerly climate, you definitely need to either move somewhere sunnier or just up your dosage of oral vitamin D, dietary vitamin D, and specifically D3, ideally not what's added to foods. You want one in a supplement form because it's easier to track your intake of it. And the next thing I'd consume is just tons and tons of antioxidants of all types. Greens, speaking about chlorophyll, we've already covered the importance of greens and sprouts and all those things, plus all the anti-carcinogenic properties of things like broccoli sprouts. Your yellows, your oranges, your reds, your purples, your blues, all of those things I'd make a point of including in my diet in varying amounts. Consuming dark, bittersweet chocolate, ideally sweetened with maybe stevia and xylitol. Don't let any sugar into your diet. literally be super strict about that, is what I would do. I keep speaking as if I'm instructing people on what to do, and I'm not doing that. I'm talking about what I would do for myself. But I just don't see myself getting it, so I slip into that mode of speaking. I'm hesitant and don't want to waste people's time getting into a whole slew of herbs and supplements, because there's no end to things that could be talked about. I could make a 3-hour video talking about supplements and herbs, and maybe I should do that at some point, but I've really covered the top ones. And as long as you're doing a wide range of things, and yet you've looked at the research, it's really not that difficult to find herbs and things with strong anti-cancer properties. You include the big ones, the immune boosting mushrooms, and you have your macronutrients sorted out, and you include high antioxidant foods. You're on the right track. Some of the more important stuff that often doesn't get talked about is things like making sure you sweat every day. So if you get a diagnosis of cancer, it's probably about time you invested in a far infrared sauna that you can use every day, literally every day. You don't want to overdo it because you will get dehydrated of salts. If you are using it and not taking salt in, you want to make sure you're drinking celery juice or any other high sodium plant foods. And you're not going there for like an hour a day, just like 20 minutes, up to half an hour. That's plenty. But also vigorous exercise. If you even purchase or go somewhere where there's a facility with one of these, bringing in that high percentage oxygen is going to knock out those cancer cells. Cancer cannot survive in an oxygen-rich environment. So my exercise regime, if I was dealing with this, would shift slightly away from more strength training, which is what I mostly focus on, towards higher endurance training. And that's specifically just to get more oxygen going into the body, get the blood flowing, which helps with detoxification as well. Definitely keep up the strength training, because with lower protein and just the effects of cancer, I definitely continue some strength training, of course, because if you're dealing with cancer, you get that wasting effect. It's not just the drugs and stuff that does that, but you're also moving slightly towards a lower protein diet. So people who have it do experience sort of a wasting effect, and that's because the cancer is using up so much protein in the bloodstream. So if you're going lower protein and the cancer is using up protein, yeah, you're going to get a little thinner. By keeping up your muscle tone with exercise, it actually staves off the loss of muscle tissue and just keeps your whole body in better shape. Plus, really late stage cancer, you see people breaking their bones in the most simplest of ways. Whether it's someone coughing and breaking a rib, that happens. People just stub their toe and their toe's fractured. You know, cancer comes about after a long period of some type of extreme deficiency, as well as toxicity. It can be a disease that manifests from deficiency, excess, toxicity. You know, there's all these different theories on the basis for diseases. Some people view disease as all being a deficiency. Some people view it as all excess. But no, there's different ways that can be set up in our body. And the confusing thing is, in the health world, is that some diseases have multiple ways in which they can come about. So one person could have cancer that was deficient in something that caused this cancer to come about. Another person had excess in their diet, i.e. the protein content. So while this person was deficient in an array of minerals, this person had the excess of protein, and they could both have the exact same cancer in the exact same place. So keep that in mind, and that's an importance with exercise and just proper nutrition. So in terms of other therapies and things I'd probably explore would be things like acupuncture, just any kind of self-pampering with massages and things to keep relaxed and focused. And then you also have to deal with the emotional and spiritual levels in one's own way. You have to address the traumas in one's life. They can be a root cause if you've had a really dramatic history. Now, I wouldn't see that necessarily being a big issue for myself, but I just have to mention that because that's a big part of the whole picture, and we're not going to talk about it too much. But you'd be quite amazed hearing testimonials from people who they were doing everything they could to fight the cancer, and they were eating a pristine diet, they did this, that, and the other thing, never quite budged. And then they finally started some therapy, started talking about how they were abused as a child, and lo and behold, the cancer clears up. There's connections between the body and the mind that people have intellectual understandings of, but they haven't either experienced themselves, they haven't been exposed to it because it doesn't get talked about, obviously, in mainstream culture at all. But it is profound, the connections that are there. So sometimes the dietary detoxifying approach is going to have absolutely zero effect on a cancer. So like I've been saying all along, if I were to have it, this diagnosis, I would be taking approaches on all 4 levels of dealing with the physical. There's obviously the most work involved in the nutrition, the exercise, detoxification through various avenues. Even doing colon hydrotherapy would be a good thing to help keep things flowing, because when you up the amount of detoxification through herbs or whatever it is you're taking, it's going to be more than what you might have been experiencing in everyday life. So doing some rounds of colon hydrotherapy, even though it seems drastic and invasive, it's very good, especially if you have an issue in the bowels, and that is definitely one of the better therapies that one would use to stimulate fresh blood flow. You would not believe what people's bowels start to look like in their later ages. We think of our body the way we see medical diagrams with these pristine, perfectly shaped organs and features, but decades of poor diet, poor nutrition causes all sorts of weird kinks and unnatural, inharmonious placements of the organs. And one thing that colon hydrotherapy does is just, you kind of bloat everything up, everything that might have been caked in there, if there was anything. I'm not of the mindset that says there's years and years of impacted fecal matter inside your bowels. It doesn't happen. It doesn't look like that when people get colonoscopies regularly. But you do get pockets in the bowels that do collect fecal matter. It's not decades old or even years old, but it just moves slower along that part. Just like if you think of a riverbed, that the more it's twisting and turning, the more silt will build up in some areas. That doesn't mean that silt that's on the top or even further down has been there for years. The river changes over time, but areas of less flow are going to obviously have problems in those areas where there's less flow. So by filling the large intestine up with water and then letting it all drain out, it's kind of like a reset. Plus you have the direct line to the liver, the hepato something vein somewhere in there. There's actually toxins that are moved out of the body through that avenue. So yeah, we want to keep the colon clear. We want to get digestion working optimally. But I digress. I was talking about the 4 levels. Yes, the physical is big. You've got a lot to do. It becomes a full-time job if you're dealing with a serious illness like this for a period of time. You obviously can get back into normal life if you're still in the midst of a career. The mental and emotional side of it, I'd put those kind of in the same category, because I would do talk therapy, I'd do various other sort of more alternative natural health approaches. I'm not really too familiar with this, but I would look into this stuff if the need arose, whether it's hypnotherapy, so just a counselor is beneficial, but you make it known to them that you're wanting to dig into your past and really dredge up whatever it is they can help you examine. Then also consider the spiritual. I'm not saying you have to believe in anything, but it's about reflecting on the wider universe as a whole and just how you relate to it, what's your place in it, what's your direction in life, your purpose. I'd put morality into this category, even though it is a mental pursuit of rationally going over what you perceive your morals to be. But atheists tend to just abandon all ideas of morality because there's nothing that they perceive as holding them to a higher level of morality. So you kind of have to perhaps address this in yourself. For myself, I wouldn't have this issue. I'm not an atheist, and I have what I would call very highly developed sense of morality and ethics that I hold myself to, and if I find myself slipping in any way, I have my ways that I go about self-correcting and improving my life again. Perhaps this is something, if you happen to be doing phoenix tears, might bring up in you. There's other avenues one could pursue, whether it's like an ayahuasca journey or other psychedelics which could open up those avenues for people. I don't recommend that as the only way to find spirituality. It's also not a necessary way, but if you've always been curious about that and you find you're more of an agnostic and you're searching for that, if you happen to be in a situation that calls for that search, there can be more direct mainline ways to some kind of a source, which can be achieved through substances under the proper guidance with a shaman or what have you. And I think that's quite a bit more important when you have the intent of using something like that with that purpose, because A, you're sick and you don't want to be doing something that could be stressful to your body and cause undue psychological stress, but you also, if you have the intent of trying to break through and get to something, it could even fall under the area of being more mental and emotional, not just spiritual. But if you're really using something like that for that purpose, it really helps to have guidance. Just like you can't counsel yourself, you can't do psychotherapy on yourself. So people obviously use psychoactive substances more recreationally, and also in terms of like a self-exploration type setting and intent, and that's perfectly legitimate. But specifically, I think when it comes to dealing with possible impending death from a disease, it's a time when guidance is quite helpful and I'd say necessary. So again, I just want to emphasize that I'm not saying that psychedelic exploration is essential. I'm just putting it out there as something that has been helpful to people. Probably maybe would be helpful to myself if I was facing that. And even if you're at the point of being terminal and for whatever reason you are coming up to impending death, there's pretty good research around psychedelics and helping people become comfortable and not stressed about the fact that they're dying and actually accept the process. So that's a comforting reassurance that that's available, to deal with pain on that sort of level, that fear, which is basically a type of pain. We have drugs and things in hospital that people get hepped up on that deal with the physical pain, but impending doom, you don't know what it's like unless you're experiencing it. Not many people can attest to what that must feel like. So anything that can give us reassurance on that spiritual level is a key factor, and that can be part of turning it around as well. So that sums up my approach to what I would do if I was in the circumstance of experiencing this most unfortunate diagnosis of cancer of any type. And I'm curious what you might do, or if there's any one particular thing that stands out. I'm not asking people to give a whole diatribe in written format about what they would do, but just maybe suggest one thing. And then the people viewing this who might wish to look into some of these things, they also have the comments to access and glean relevant information off of, and create some leads to exploring and researching this topic themselves. So like, favorite, and share the video if you feel so inclined. And with that, I'll talk to you again soon. Take care and embrace life without limits.